Alright, let's move on in our series of the deep dive on the river canyon. And this one, actually, let's start exploring some variations on the type of rivers or river canyons, or rather the type of mountain scenes. We've seen a lot of mountain scenes that were just basically centered around one valley. And what I'd like to do is discuss an alternative to that now. So just as a recap, when we use this tool here, the linear gradient tool, maybe we used it in a diagonal way to create sort of the main path for our river to be contained in the gray zone, and the mountains will be on the left and on the right side of that. Or maybe same thing here, this was the original in Danwichi's very first river canyon. You could also, perhaps if you need a longer valley, you can make it horizontal. And so in the gray zone is where that river will go through as we use the render plasma noise in difference mode. Right, in the difference mode. There you go. There you see the main path contained in that gray zone of the gradient. And so you can adjust this a little bit until you find the type of river path that you want. And let's say what something like this. So that will give you a nice mountain scene through the 3D designer in next to no time. And of course, then it's just a matter of adjusting the lighting, perhaps adding some ambient light there, giving the position of the lighting, adding also the shadow cast. There you go, cast shadows, make it a little bit higher. There you go. And you see there's a great variety of effects you can have with that, depending on how you adjust these lightings. Of course, opening up erosion and sediments, texturing it, and you see how in next to no time you can create that wonderful appearance of mountain scene. And it just took a few seconds. So now, but this one is indeed a single valley, the river canyon going through that. And we might want to do something a little bit different now. So what I'm talking about now is to actually have not just one valley going through, but basically having a couple in parallel. So let's go back and actually create a new image. I'm going to create a very large image this time, very high resolution. Let's make it double at least that, maybe even more. Let's make it 3000 pixels. All right. Oh, I don't like the odd number here on the height, so let's make it perhaps 1600 on that. Yeah, that comes out right. The width 2844. And so here's our new image. It's bigger than my screen resolution, so I need to actually zoom out if I want to see it all. And there it is. Let's go and use our linear gradient tool. But before we were using it in something like this way, right? Now I'm going to need a gradient that repeats a few times, and I can do this a few ways. I can, if I don't need it perfectly parallel to each other, I can do one like that, and then I can go to the subtractive mode perhaps, and add another one like this, and another one, maybe not the other direction. So you got to be careful how to do that, because you're subtracting and things go away very quickly. So maybe we need to work on that gradient. So let's find our gradient tool here under the sweep editor. And you notice it's a black to white transition across all these gray values. And what we'd like to do is perhaps work on the value and change it so that it goes up to bright and then back dark, and then bright and then dark again, and then bright and then dark again, and then bright and then dark again. So do a couple of those. They don't have to be perfect. You can smooth it right here, click and hold it a few times, or add a few more very tight variations, and that will just simply add more alterations of high hills and low valleys. Right, wherever it's dark in our gradient, that's going to carve the appearance of a valley, and whenever it's brighter, it's going to be appearing like the mountain scene. So I'm going to erase this and keep it in the default mode, opaque, and then just drag my gradient like this. Now again, you could also combine that in a few other ways, like screen mode, perhaps get a few of different valleys in different ways, and that quickly generates very interesting shapes to try. Another thing you could also do is, let's first store this, is perhaps to displace this a little bit, to deform it. So there are some filters you might want to explore under the transform, Sinoid, for instance, that allows you to kind of add a little bit of a waviness to it, and this might help guide your rivers and valleys, the mountains, as if there were some tectonic plate movements at work, right? Some movement of the continents, creating additional guidance for the mountains and therefore also for the rivers on how to proceed going through that. Let's see, there's another one I had in mind. There was a Sinoid, there's a wave distort. So there's a couple of interesting filters to try here. And let's try the wave distort here. Where is it? There. So the wave distort is a bit too extreme if you have too many wave sources. The frequency also, you want to keep it very low, and then the displacement, give it just a tiny little bit. Anyway, so something like this will make it look already much more interesting from a purely tectonic point of view, right? Continental drift type of way. You have some sort of collision of mountains, and things don't really behave very elastic in an elastic way. So this you could see as a starting point for where you're going to next add your plasma noise, and it is still in this mode, the difference mode, so it is still carving the rivers in there, and it's of course going to be very different from what you've seen before. So you could have here perhaps too many of these valleys, but let's try something like this. Let's see what that looks like. All right, and then go as usual to the transform 3D designer, and it remembers the settings we had just before, so it will give us about the same view. And now we can go and increase this, change the width here, change the scale in this direction. Maybe we have too much, and let's reduce the erosion. Let's you see, this takes a little bit longer now too, because it is a much higher resolution image, so we have much more detail to crunch through. Let's change the background color. We want to have kind of a bluish background with some white haze, and then now let's go and plug that erosion on it, and position this such a way that we kind of see along that valley, and you can see some parts there that look just beautiful. And that's the idea, is to see if you can find a nice rolling hills appearance in some of these. Let's see, that's a little bit too much snow appearance. I want to give it more green, so let's go and change the coloring, the texture there, create a new texture, and let the grass go up into higher elevation, and perhaps have the sediments filled with the grass color. That will possibly help too, to give it a bit more of a spring look. We could add some ground fog. Let's see here, something like that. We could add some distance fog. It's this one here, and soon enough we have our beautiful mountain scene. And it's a matter of just finding the right angle that you like the most, and render that. Perhaps add a little bit of snow or clouds to that as well. And look at what we did in just a few seconds here, right? So I mean, that's one way to further explore the 3D designer into other types of scenic views and vistas. You can certainly then take it further. Perhaps you don't need it at this very high resolution. I mean, yes, you do if this is going to be a background for a poster shot. You probably do want it at very high definition. The more pixels you have, the better. But let's say this is going back down to a high definition video at 720p or 1280 by 720. You can certainly then take it down and resample here, and bring it down to a more manageable resolution. 1280 by 720, and perhaps also add a little bit of sharpening to that. Digital Photo Enhance is a good one for that. In hue saturation value mode. Lots of different ways to either overdo it or get it just right. Here, for instance, you might say, well, that was a little bit too much sharpening. Let's see if you can interactively undo back to the prior and find the sweet spot where you just like it perfect. Same thing with any of the other filters, really. If you go to filters like the soft contrast improvement, you might say, okay, let's give it a little bit of softness there, make it a little bit brighter, increase the exposure, and reduce the level of that soft contrast improvement, and then see if we can find an even better adjustment from before and after. Right? With this interactive undo, you can find any step here in between, and then do that also with, for instance, the fog filter. If you want to add a little bit of fog on the lower, closer side, that would be an interesting way to do it as well. Perhaps a little bit of a bluish tint to that, or even greenish, something like so. And same with the sunset filters. Now the sunset will have a bit of both, right? The sunset will have, where is it here? Sunset will have some coloration towards the upper part of the image. You might give it a bit of a orange or reddish tint because the sun is setting over there. And you might have a bit more of a bluish or maybe a purplish appearance to give a hint at some coloring that comes from the skies above, right? If the clouds are showing some beautiful red cloud colors during the sunset, you might reflect that in some discoloration upon the atmospheric fog and clouds and just the image altogether. So a lot of different ways to give it a different mood here after you're done with that initial image creation. All right, so that was one way to create yet another very different river canyon, and really a whole series of them. Let's just practice that one more time. I'm going to clear this and start again. Now this time I'll start with an existing gradient. There's one here that I had done a little bit earlier. Let's actually create a new one and use the sweep editor. Instead of creating it manually like we did earlier, we'll just select one of the existing, loading that. There's so many different presets here. Let's take one of the picture frames and see if we can find something of interest here. This one here, it's a starting point, but it's not exactly what I was looking for. So let me go to another one. There's gradients here. Click on that. If you are on this tool, right, the one with the linear gradient tool, there is a gradient option here, and that will give you many of these presets. And you could look for this one here, for instance. That one has a couple of gray and dark bands, or this one here. So not as many as I had created earlier, but that's probably just fine. This is a little bit more manageable, a little bit more contained, a bit more reasonable, right? Let's not go overboard. So let's take this one. No, let's take this one, all right? Something like that. So we're still in that odd mode. Let's go to opaque mode and see. Yep. So here we have our bands of varying intensities, and we could still work on that a little bit if we wanted to adjust the value to give a bit more contrast, perhaps make it a little bit more narrow on those gray zones, not too much. And doesn't really matter there, but what we could do certainly also is go back to that displacement or the rubber sheet, the wave distort, any of these filters that can help us get some additional variation to the way that the river will be carved along it. Right, so let's go and perhaps turn this into a grayscale. And so now let's go to our render plasma noise, and we are still in difference mode. Yes, we are. And now this time we have, these kind of very different rivers carved through here. Let's go and let's just take this one here, but also add a little bit of widening of the canyons. We remember how to do that. We can use the value and increase the contrast, or we can use the curves tool and stay a little bit lower here and a little bit higher. Let's do something that looks a little bit more like Monument Valley or Grand Canyon-ish, right? Where we have a sort of a plateau forming on some of these peaks. Not too much of that, but a little bit, and then steep down, and in a kind of a high plateau valley, and then suddenly kind of a couple of deep canyon rivers going down. So this will look perhaps, like a Marble Canyon area, where we have the Colorado River carving a very deep valley. We're on a mid-grade level here. That's the high plateau, but then there's a couple of monolithic mountains all around us as well. The twist to this is that it's not just one river, it's a whole bunch of Colorado rivers coming together here, so to speak. And so let's go and store this one. That one's interesting. We don't want to lose it. Let's go to Transform 3D Designer, and we have still all that fog there somewhere, so let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of this fog. Let's bring it back down. That's what it is. I'm way in the wrong place. Let's disable the clouds. Let's disable the coloring too right now. Let's switch back to just the color from the image and something like that, and zoom out. Okay, so here we are, and we can adjust as usual the brightness. Where is it? Here, the light source. Let's say we want to have a very long look into this plateau, into this valley, and we need to give it a bit of a reddish tint on the sky even, so we'll have kind of a dusty, sandy look. Sandstorm maybe is a Martian landscape. We have a little bit of coloring. We could set the object color actually, or we could do that through creating the texture there too. But what we'll do is we'll set, instead of green grass, we'll have rocky brown, and instead of we still have the grays. Well, we might still want to give that a bit of a rocky brown appearance as well, maybe a little bit lighter. And then there is definitely some snow caps, but we'll make it very bright snow. It's not totally white at first. And then so we can adjust that, give it kind of a winter scene. Let's disable the fog for now. We could enable the fog in the distance. Yep, there it is. Now we need to work on that erosion. We see these potholes, and that's a common feature when it's flat, when the rain doesn't know which way to go. It erodes, it starts eroding, it just digs in deep, but it doesn't go nowhere. So that's something you can adjust here with the flatness threshold. If it's 0, you just have a lot of these potholes. If it's very low, that's the default value is 2. Let's go to 5, and we gradually see some of these disappear. Let's go to 12. Boom, you see it's getting a little bit flatter here. So let's make this about 33 or something like that, and you'll see less of these potholes, fewer, and then you could say, well, let's give it a bit more rain, however, or less. Here's the difference, right? If you give it less rain, it's really going to look more like a desert because it doesn't rain that much. But then there are some deserts that are starting to experience climate change, or maybe in olden times there was much more rain. So you could see what happens with that if you actually load it with more river activity near the mountains. And there's also something to be said for the maximum run length of these rivers. That can also give a little bit of a different appearance there. And then of course the sediments. Yep, the sediments. And I get all sedimental about the sediments. That's certainly a great way to add, make it look like sand deposits along the transition from the flat to the steep side here. So you can see how it kind of curves up here. Let's give it a little bit more brightness there. And it's just amazing how quickly you can create a very different appearance to this entire scene. One thing I want to do is also have the white be kind of fluffy along the edge here. So let's see the smoothing. If I give it 1, it's no smoothing. If I give it 9, now it's a little bit more blended, blurred appearance on that coloring. I do want to also check the intensity. It's very low, so that's making a very sudden transition. And if I increase the intensity, that's when maybe if I'm at 33, you get some variation there, some alteration, and a little bit of noise, and that's really what we need. We need to make noise. Let's see this one here, 22. Play with those a little bit. Maybe that's too much. 22. You know, you'll just want to experiment with these values a little bit. It varies based on the terrain, the elevation, the slope. It's very sensitive to the slope, because you see that the white is at the top of the mountains here. It is also down in the bottom of the mountains or in the valleys, but it is not showing on the slopes, the steep parts. And so that's what we do with our erosion. We don't just look at where is it, how high it is, but also, and so could the erosion start there, but the coloring also, could the coloring actually stay there based on the slope? So we have a lot of things going on here to calculate that. Let's see if we can change the coloring to be more of a rocky appearance for those deposits, or even a snowy appearance. And so now we have more of a winter scene here. Let's see if we can do a few more things to give it even more of a really fantasy look there. Maybe make it a bit wider, move it a little bit to the side, turn it a little bit, something like that. I mean, this is where you'll just get it right. And let's move back a little bit. So now you see that there are some remnants of rivers showing here, right? And that's several of them, because we had the gradient at first to kind of contain it and force it into several main rivers or main features. And I think we're pretty much done here with this one. I might want to add a little bit of cloudiness to that. Let's see, not too much on that side. Let's put some clouds in the back there somewhere. So let's go get our puffy clouds, reduce it to farther distance there, back there. Let's bring it together and make it brighter, something like that. Just something to add some interest, to add a little bit of something different there somewhere. Might want to adjust the elevation of the clouds, something like that. And you can also create your own clouds. I mean, there's 4 presets here, but you know the saying, if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself. So that's a different chapter, a different tutorial on how to use the cloud generator. The cloud particle-based cloud system to generate your own clouds, and then save them, and then you'll see them appear in this menu, so you can start using them in your own scenes as well. So let's see one more. I'll do just a little bit more here. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Let's do a final adjustment on the detail here. Pre-filter, maybe 1 or 2 levels of anti-aliasing. Oh, we didn't touch the lighting so much, especially the ambient light. Let's see if we can ambient occlusion that. Yeah, it reveals a bit more on the the dark parts here, so that's good. I like that. And then just find the proper lighting for the directional light source that casts the shadows. Let's give it a little bit more here. We probably want to have even less on the backlighting, so it's pretty dark here. Perhaps something like this. And to bring the light source down lower for long shadows, that's too long. Let's give it a chance to actually lighten up some of the snowpacks here. Right? And let's give it the best anti-aliasing possible now. And I think we have some fog. No, we disabled that. Let's see what happens with that. Maybe that's too much. What do you think? Too much fog? Just the right amount here. And it's interesting because the fog will fill those valleys, like the deep parts of the river, quite quickly, and that's actually good. It's probably something we want to some extent, and to work with that. So let's see. Perhaps we just need to move this over to the right side a little bit and make it a little bit wider, like so. And perhaps adjust this a tiny little bit. There you go. So you know, that's basically it. We have so many different types of river canyons and landscapes you can create with that, and it's just up to you now to explore some of these techniques to get to a very different type of landscape based on whatever your story needs. All right, thanks for watching.